All right, prospective Linux gamers, welcome. This is Accessible Linux Gaming. So, I've gotten a lot of requests over the past several months since starting the channel to do some basic tutorial content. And while I am not a certified Linux expert, I am definitely here as a member of the community to help you guys transition into Linux from Windows. So, first part in the series, how to set up an easy dual boot with Windows 10, Windows 11, and Fedora. This is something that's going to be easy for you to manage and something that's going to be kind of hard for you to mess up. So this tutorial, I'm going to assume that you are going to use a separate storage medium to install Linux on that is distinct from the storage device that you have Windows installed on. I think there are several advantages to this approach. Sometimes shrinking volumes in Windows and then allocating new partitions and installing a new OS to the unallocated fresh partition can be a little tricky. I've also seen occasions where sometimes Windows updates will kind of muck up Linux installs. I used to work at a computer store, and I can't tell you how many times somebody came in because they were messing with the disk management utility or trying to shrink a volume, or they booted up into a recovery environment and used gparted and completely borked their computer. So we're gonna keep it simple. I understand that for people on laptops, this might be a bit of a challenge if you don't have available SATA space or storage space. But if you're on desktop, or if you have the capacity to add an additional storage device to your computer, I think that this is worth it. Go and get yourself a cheap 256 gigabyte SSD and get some spitting rust. Install your games onto that as a means for mass storage. I think that's a good approach for a beginner. All right, so what are we going to do today? We are going to get Fedora. We're going to get an ISO for Fedora. We're going to use a bootable disk writing utility to make your live CD. We're going to boot into the live CD environment. We're going to install Fedora. We're going to update Fedora. We are going to give you the privileges that you'll need to run as root by setting a root password. We are going to show you how to get your Nvidia proprietary drivers if you're on Nvidia. I'm going to show you how to look at Steam, getting Steam installed. And yeah, we're just going to have some fun with it. I'm going to kind of do things live, so if I bump my head or pause for a minute, just bear with me. I'll try to keep this as concise and approachable as possible, and I'll try not to use crazy language for the purpose of not confusing people or just being wordy unnecessarily, because jargon sucks. So let's get right into it. What I do generally is I'll go to, I'll just do like Fedora, ISO, blah, blah, blah. And there's a lovely website called getfedora.org. The developers have included a media writing tool that you can use to create your bootable USB drive. This works fine. I generally find that sometimes downloads through this tool are kind of slow. So what I do is I just grab the DVD ISO here. There are several other utilities that you can use as alternatives to this, and a popular one is called Balena Etcher. Okay, that's one tool that's available. A lot of people like it. I am sort of old school, so I use a tool called Rufus. And yeah, it's it's ugly. It's ugly, oh boy, but I've used it hundreds and hundreds of times. It always does exactly what I expect it to do. It's tiny and it's reliable. So yeah, definitely a popular tool. I'm going to be using Rufus today. So I think I just have Rufus in my downloads folder. And it's just an executable. Super tiny, super simple. You don't even really need to run like an installer for it. You just run the executable and it works. All right, so I have a 16 gigabyte USB storage device attached here. It's being passed through to this VM. You're gonna want to use a USB stick. Yeah, so go ahead and once you got your ISO, open up Rufus or whatever. Get the ISO, let it do its thing. I've generally not had to change these options for the purpose of installing Linux, I usually just kind of leave them as they are, and that seems to work fine for me. It might yell about a few things here in a second, but we'll get through that. Yep. So if you see this message, just do what Rufus suggests. That's fine. Be careful that you have the right drive selected, because this is going to delete your stuff. All right, we'll just go ahead and let it do its thing. It might yell, I might throw up an additional warning message that's going to say that it needs to download something in order to write the disk properly. Just accept it. It's okay. You may not see these messages with other USB key writers. All right, so I'm going to stop the recording and I'll jump right back in once this is finished. All right, Rufus is done. So turn your computer off and unplug the storage device that has Windows installed on it. I know, it's kind of a pain in the butt and it's really not necessary, but if it's your first time installing Linux, this is a pretty good safeguard. The way that Linux labels hard drives is different than how Windows labels hard drives. So if you're looking at the installer for the first time and you're not completely sure about what device you're supposed to be installing to, this is a pretty good safety measure. It just ensures that you don't accidentally format your drive. Also, if you're doing it the other way around, if you have Linux installed first and you're needing to reinstall Windows, sometimes what I've noticed was when you're reinstalling Windows, it'll do something kind of dumb. It will sometimes dump like boot files or create like a temporary boot partition on like the first drive that it detects when the installer is run for Windows, and sometimes this can cause a headache. So yeah, if you're installing either way, it's probably a good idea while you're new to just unplug the other storage device. Like I said, go get yourself a cheap SSD and some spinning Rust. The benefit to the approach that I'm going to show you today is that if either Windows or Linux completely craps itself and does not boot, you will not be stuck without a computer. You'll be able to at least boot into one or the other. So I think that this is a good approach. All right, let's go ahead and get the computer restarted and we'll boot the installer up and we'll get installing. Okay, this is going to be fun. I'll be back in a minute. All right, booted right up. If this didn't show up automatically for you, you probably just need to go into your BIOS and switch your boot options to target this bootable USB key that you just made. So let's go ahead and start the installer up. The installer doesn't look like much, but don't be fooled. It's very, very, very fast. All right. If you want, you can kind of try Fedora out and make sure that your Wi-Fi works or that your sound works. Sometimes things kind of won't fall into place until after you install, but this is kind of a good little measure just to check the system out. So we're going to install a hard drive. English. I believe this is called the Anaconda installer. Some people poke fun at it because it's kind of ugly, but you know what? Like, it does what it's supposed to do. All right, so because we only have one storage device attached right now, it's gonna pick one by default. So I've gone ahead and just provisioned this 20 gigabyte virtual storage device. You can, if you want to sort of like resize your partitions, there are options available for that. I would probably just suggest just sticking with the default for now. That's going to be fine for you. There are ways to change this after the fact, but with how BTRFS is and how LVM is these days, it's really not necessary to futz around too much with that, unless you have a special need for it. So let's just go ahead and accept the defaults. Okay, just provision it automatically. Yeah, just let the sucker go. It's gonna go pretty fast. I'm not going to get too into the nitty gritty. I'm going to try to keep this as non-technical as possible. Sometimes just accepting the defaults is a good way to go. So I'm just going to let this go, and we'll come right back in a minute. All right, so that literally just took a few minutes. Very, very fast. Fedora is nice and lightweight. I really like it. It doesn't come with too much crap out of the box, but you can put crap on it if you want to. So finish your installation. Go ahead and remove the device, like your USB key. And yeah, we'll boot into the live environment here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that virtually. And we're just going to stop this. We're going to shut it down. I'm going to go here. And then we're going to go, I could just change the boot option if I wanted, but I can just go ahead and remove this for now. Not going to delete it. I'm just going to remove it. And then I can go into my boot options and set the one disk that I have available as the primary, which it did automatically, it looks like. Okay, so let's go ahead and just boot this VM back up. Bada bing, bada boom. You got Fedora. All right. So it's going to walk you through sort of the unboxing setup, which is kind of a nice touch. I just keep this stuff enabled. This is helpful. Location services, I mean, it's not going to track telemetry on you. It's just going to help you like when you're using your web browser and stuff like that. So yeah. Third-party repositories, these are great. It makes installing the Nvidia proprietary driver as well as things from FlatHub like trivial. Definitely enable this. I'm happy that they included this in the out-of-box experience here. Next, if you have a cloud provider where you've got your stuff synced up, you can elect to include that here. I don't, so I'm just going to skip. I'm just going to call this Fedora. If you need to like register a domain name, you can do that here. I'm assuming most of you are probably hobbyists. Go ahead and hit next. Pick a password. Make sure it's secure. I'm going to pick one that I can remember. I got enough passwords to remember already. Okay, all done, like really quick. It's going to kind of offer you a tour of GNOME 41. This is going to be your default desktop environment if you went with the GNOME ISO. I like GNOME. It does sort of, it's very minimalistic, so I think that for some people coming from Windows, it can be a little weird to work with, but I'm going to show you some tweaks that's going to make the experience a little bit easier for you. If you're interested in this stuff, go ahead and read through it. Close. All right, so with the way that this is set up now, we're going to need, in order to get to our like app, or I don't even know what they call this, our dock and our applications menu, you're going to need to hit your Windows key or the super key. You can also just go up here and hit activities. There are some apps that are pre-installed. A useful one is help. Yeah, GNOME help. It'll help you out. If you want to go ahead and start sort of customizing this stuff, what you can do, this is sort of a neat feature of GNOME 41. You can just sort of like map these things together and then, oops, I got a little click happy there. You can sort of map these things together and, you know, you could just do like utilities, whatever. Just a customization option that, you know, you might not be aware of. Sometimes this app drawer, I call it the app drawer, it can get a little crowded. So being able to do these groupings is kind of nice. Your software center is going to be the primary means by which you are going to install software. Other than the terminal, I do suggest using the terminal though. It generally tends to work better, I find. Well, this is a pretty good experience here. The third-party repositories that we just enabled, if you ever need to go in and disable some of those, you can find this from this hamburger menu, software repositories. It's going to list all the ones that were installed or included when we did the out-of-box experience. So we have FlatHub here, we have Google Chrome, we have RPM Fusion. This is going to be where you're going to be able to get the Nvidia driver, and we have Steam. So all of this stuff is just like included kind of out of the box on Fedora. You don't have to run any commands to get at this stuff. First thing that I think you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go ahead and open up a terminal, and we're going to want to update the system first thing. So it's going to say yes, yes. With great power comes great responsibility. Go ahead and enter in your password that you gave during the out-of-box experience. So your user password. This will allow you to run a single command as if you were the root user. So running a command with sudo is different than being root. We'll try to log into the root user here in a second, and you'll find that you won't be able to, and we need to set a root password in order to do that. So it grabbed 1.2 gigs of updates pretty quickly. One thing that's interesting about, I think, doing it from the terminal here is it does provide a very good synopsis of what exactly is being updated. This might not mean anything to you now, but you'll start to realize things. So sometimes this can be informative. So once that's done, go ahead and hit Y. Pretty fast. I have really fast internet, so downloading and applying 1.2 gigs of updates is not an issue. So at this point, we have Fedora installed. We've set up a user account. We still have our Windows storage device disconnected. We're running some updates. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video because I don't think that you guys, it's actually going pretty darn fast. I don't think that you guys want to sit here and wait 3 minutes though. So I'll go ahead and stop and come back once this is done. All right, we are done updating. So let's go ahead and restart the system. If you ever are kind of on this boot splash screen and it's taking a while and you want to know what the heck it's doing, you can hit the up arrow and it will tell you. So this can actually be fairly useful. Like if the system stops at a certain point and you don't know why, you might be able to take the message that's displayed on that screen there and do a little bit of research. All right, so we're all updated now. It's a good thing to do that right out of the gate. Let's go ahead and I'll show you guys something real quick. What you're going to find is that there's going to be some occasions where you're going to need to be running as the root user, specifically when editing certain configuration files, and in some instances it can make doing certain actions that are related to systems maintenance and administration a heck of a lot easier. But be very careful about running as root. Generally, you do not want to be logged into the root account and installing programs that you, as a user, expect to run. This can actually cause a lot of problems. So only really log into root when you actually need to, but you're going to need to occasionally. So if I do su dash, it's going to ask me for the root password. If I type in anything, it doesn't matter what I type in, It's not going to let me do it. So what I'm going to need to do is do sudo pass wd root. Okay, and then it's going to ask me for the password that I provided during the out of box. So go ahead and put in your password. Okay, now this is the important part. You're going to want to make sure that you're typing in the right thing, because if you bungle this up, and I don't know how you would manage to enter in the wrong password twice, but if you forget this password or if you do a misstroke, you're going to have a hard time. So make sure that you are putting in the right thing. It's going to yell at me because I'm using a crappy password that's not safe at all. All right. So now we have actually provided the password for the root account. So if I do su-now, it's going to ask for that password, and I can now log in as root. So you can see here it says root at localhost, and instead of the tilde, it's showing a pound symbol. That pound symbol denotes that you are running as root. So you're going to need to be able to access this account, but just be pretty freaking careful when you're doing it. Yeah. Just bear that in mind, and you should be okay. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to install the Nvidia proprietary driver. There are a lot of resources on YouTube that I think are a few years old or maybe aren't Fedora specific that do a fairly bad job of explaining this process. Here in Fedora 35, it's stupid easy. All you need to do is go into your software center, type in Nvidia. There'll generally be I think two versions here. So you're getting this from the RPM Fusion non-free repository. I think this is like sort of like a community repository where certain useful pieces of software that are proprietary are kept. So yeah, you can install the driver. Literally, I think this is the most update version number, 7 weeks ago. Let's check the other one, see what that says. Yeah, this is like an older one. So you're gonna want this one. Just go ahead and install it. Like literally, you just hit install. It's stupid easy. You don't want to, I've even seen some recent videos that have said, go to the Nvidia website and get this .run file. That process, it's actually not quite as simple as running just a .run file, and it can be kind of hairy, and it's not the way that you're going to want to go. Pretty much on any distribution, there's going to be a more convenient way of installing that driver. Sometimes when you do kernel updates, that installation method can cause a headache, and you might need to go and repeat that process, which for beginners kind of sucks. So just install it this way. We're going to want to reboot the system again, so we're just going to restart. It may take a second here. Again, if you want to see what's happening, up arrow. All right, once we are booted back into Fedora, we're going to take a look at editing the GRUB configuration file to point at our Windows install. So I'm going to stop the video and we'll go back to it. All right, so booting back up again. Before going through with these next steps, you're going to want to power your system off and attach your Windows OS drive. Okay. It's getting kind of late, but I'm just going to keep going to try to help you guys out. All right. So what we're going to do now is we are going to probe the attached storage devices for other operating systems, and we are going to then update the GRUB configuration file to allow us to kind of seamlessly choose between Windows and Linux on boot. This is a lot more convenient than having to go into your BIOS and switch the boot options around, or using the Windows bootloader to boot into Linux. GRUB is pretty darn good. What we're doing now is we're editing the GRUB bootloader that's on a completely separate storage device than your Windows install. So this isn't going to muck anything up. You're basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to be booting to the Linux storage device initially, and then that's going to start GRUB up for you. And then from GRUB, you can just say, hey, go over to Windows land now. So this is a pretty safe and I think approachable way of dealing with it. You can go the other way around, and there is a tool in the Windows UI to set additional boot options for other operating systems. Using the Windows bootloader to boot Linux kind of sucks. You're gonna want to use GRUB. It allows you to roll back to different kernel versions and gives you a lot of good access into tools and even the command line if you need it. If you need to go into your rescue environment or something like that. So yeah, boot GRUB. Don't boot the Windows bootloader. Okay, so let's get right at it. The first thing we're going to need to do is, again, open a terminal window. You're going to start noticing a pattern here. My Linux vets are probably yelling at me for not using a hotkey to open my terminal. I'm just used to doing things my way. So there's that. So there's going to be a few commands that we're going to need to run. The first one is going to be sudo os prober. Give it your password. Oops. Give it your password correctly. Okay, so it found something here, right? This it's saying it found Windows on the second storage device, the first partition. There's a bootable reference there to Windows. So what we're going to do is we're going to run another command. Let me go ahead and bring this up just to make sure that I do this right. I'm going to show you guys what I'm looking at. Right, just had to find something real quick. Want to make sure I'm giving you all the right information. So after running that os prober command, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to generate the GRUB configuration file. This grub2-make config command is going to do that for us, but this on its own isn't going to write anything. That's where the second half of the command comes into play. So for BIOS-based systems, you're going to want to run this one up top, and for UEFI-based systems, you're going to want to run the one that I've laid out at the bottom here. If you're not sure what kind of system you're running, go ahead and just copy this. We're going to log in as root real quick to check this. So su-, type in the password. Go ahead and copy that command in there, and it's just going to print back what kind of system we're running. So in my case, I'm going to run this one up top. It's going to write the file to /etc/grub2.cfg. For UEFI-based systems, it's going to write it to /etc/grub2-efi.cfg. So let's just go ahead and copy that in. All right, it generated the GRUB configuration file, found Windows 10 on dev SDB1, so second detected hard drive, first partition. It's added a boot menu entry for the UEFI firmware settings, and it says done. So that's looking pretty promising, right? Let's go ahead and exit out of here and restart the computer, and let's see what we get. All right, so GRUB booted right up. We have different versions of our kernel that we can boot. We have our rescue environment. This is pretty important. You're going to want that in case that you need it. And we also have Windows 10. So let's go ahead and try booting into Windows 10. Hey, not bad. So we've got Linux on one storage device with its bootloader, and then we have Windows on another storage device with its bootloader, completely separate. The only interconnect here is that GRUB is pointing at Windows when we want to boot Windows up. So yeah, this is a pretty seamless experience. I think this is a heck of a lot better than I've seen some tutorials that say, oh, just go into your BIOS and flip switches around, and It's not a good way to do it. You don't want to do it that way. Do it this way. It's a better way. Booted back up. Let's go ahead and log in. And we're going to make some tweaks that's going to make this a little bit more usable for someone coming from Windows. First things first, I've had you guys staring at this tiny little window. Let's go ahead and increase my resolution so that this is a little bit more viewable. Let's just do 1080p. I've had you guys thinking, man, Linux is tiny. What's going on? Okay, so let's install a tool that's going to help us modify this desktop to make it a little bit more approachable. Go ahead and open your terminal up. Again, you can just hit activities and go to the applications drawer, or you can search terminal, get your terminal that way. You can add it to the dock here by, like, if you wanted to add something to the dock, you could drag. There is some tweaks that we can do to make this a little bit more usable. So let's go ahead and do that. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to install a tool called GNOME tweak tool. Yes. Okay, we're going to run GNOME tweaks. You can do that straight from the terminal if you just want to type in GNOME tweak. It'll just open it right up. But again, you can go to the activities drawer and pull it up that way. That's fine too. Pick your poison, whatever you want to do. Everything's cool. So there are some little tweaking options in here. Ones that I find useful are to add top bar. I believe you can change the clock format here if you want to. Things up in the top. You can sort of disable menu options and things up here as well. What I find useful though is the Windows title bars. I like to enable maximize and minimize just by default, so I get those three familiar looking icons that allow me to, you know, minimize and maximize things, right? I think there are hotkeys for those. I just don't navigate that way. So that is an improvement, I think. Let's go ahead and open up Firefox, I believe it is. First, before we do that, let's go to the Software Center. And we are going to install an application that's going to help us more easily manage extensions. So I think it's called GNOME Extensions. Here, you're going to want to grab it from FlatHub. I already had it installed. Okay. I think I had to go back and edit a snippet of this video, and I already installed this. So yeah, install this if you don't have it. It's going to make your life a little bit easier. Okay, so if you're grabbing extensions, I think there's a better way to do this. I think there's other third-party applications that you can do, you can use to install those. But what I do is I just use this Firefox extension called GNOME Shell Integration. It just makes it really easy. I think this is kind of an antiquated way of doing it, but I don't want this video to go much longer, so I'll just show you something that I'm familiar with. The first thing that I'll usually install, and this is going to make some Linux users cringe, is I'll install dash-to-dock, which is basically a more traditional sort of Mac OS style dock that is always at the bottom of the screen. And in GNOME 41, the dock is really only visible by default when you have the view kind of like this when you're in your activities view. I find that a little strange. I kind of just prefer to have the dock there all the time. That's just how I work. I like to move applications that I use frequently in there. That allows me to navigate quicker. I think for people that are used to Windows, this is going to be approachable. There's also, I believe, let's go to open this application up real quick. There's some other customizations you can do if you're a Windows user with this extensions application open. You can toggle the applications view. So this is sort of like a traditional start menu with categorized applications. There's also places, which some people kind of find interesting or useful. This basically allows you to sort of quickly get at commonly used folders. What I like to do is I like to try to keep my dock kind of minimal, but but I use a lot of things, a lot of applications frequently. So I guess mine is a little cluttered, but I'll at least put the Software Center settings, files, terminal, and a couple web browsers down here. That works good for starters. So this desktop is already becoming a bit more familiar to me. I probably would disable some of these. I really only would need, I think I really only like places. That's the only one that's relevant to me. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's install Steam. So you can get it from your Software Center, Steam. You can just grab it from RPM Fusion, but because you actually have that repository added, you have access to it through the terminal as well. So installing Steam on Linux is literally that. No, it's not literally that. It's this. Okay. Yeah, you just install it. Bada bing, bada boom. It goes. Sometimes it might take a second to pop up. You can usually refresh this page and it'll figure itself out. I think it would be over here. Yeah. So I kind of like to have things sort of compressed. Like I prefer to only have one of these panes. So I'll move like icons over, and I'll group like LibreOffice together always, and just sort of create groupings. This is your Nvidia control panel. You can go in here and kind of look around. I think a better way to run it, I have minimal options because I'm running in a VM, so it doesn't know what the heck I'm doing, but I have it installed, which is kind of funny. But if you want to actually make changes that will persist, you want to do sudo Nvidia settings. And that'll open up the UI, and from here there are a few little hoops that you'll have to jump through to get things to persist after you log out. There's an option here, I think it's called force composition pipeline. You might want to have that enabled because sometimes you'll get tearing in Windows on the desktop without that, and sometimes in games. I think it adds a little bit of performance overhead to the graphics stack, but it does reduce tearing pretty effectively. So that's something that a lot of people will enable by default. Yeah, where else are we? Okay. Yeah, we got Steam, we got the Nvidia driver, we did some customization, we got our dual boot running. This is looking pretty close to a wrap. I think there's one last thing that I would like to cover, and that's how to mount an additional file system to Linux. So through the GUI here, there's a utility called just disks, and that will show you all the storage devices that are detected in the system. So you can see here's my Windows drive, and here's my Linux drive. There is another tool called Disk Usage Analyzer, which will basically do like a file tree, which will show you where everything is. So if you just have like blobs of files that are eating up space and you don't know where the heck they are, which you might not if you just switched, this is a good way to find that stuff and track it down. Although don't go willy-nilly deleting things from these system-specific folders. It's not a good idea. Usually out of your home directory, or if you're certain that you've installed something or moved something somewhere. That's a good way to reference that. Okay, so let's go ahead. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this recording. I'm going to mount an additional storage volume, and then I'm going to show you how to map that in Linux. All right, so I created an additional storage volume. Let's go ahead and mount that volume. We're going to do this through the GUI to make it approachable. There is a command line utility for managing volumes. So I created this one here, so it's just like unallocated space basically. It is the SDC, so that's the third detected storage device. It does not have any partitions, just empty space. So what I'm going to do in order to mount this, I'm going to do additional partitioning options, format partition. Generally in Linux, what I'll do, I'll name it something like Linux Mass. You can, if it has data on it, which this one doesn't, you can erase it here. Generally, what I'll do is I'll always just do ext4. You can do NTFS. You can even mount an NTFS volume and read from it. Some people will do this when they're running a dual boot and they have a mass storage that's shared with Windows, where all those games are held. Sometimes, actually, generally this seems to work fine from what I've read, but there are some games where for some reason, like if you have a launcher that's installing an update and it's trying to enumerate like how much data is available on that drive, sometimes it'll fail and people will have to do these weird little workarounds. So for the purpose of demonstration, we'll just do a file system that's native to Linux. So that's ext4. Okay, it's going to say, are you sure? I'm going to delete it. Format, it's going to ask me for my password again. Linux asks you for your password regularly. It's a good thing, though. It's a good thing. Embrace it. Okay, so now that this is a volume has been partitioned and provisioned out, you can see it says not mounted. So what I'll need to do is I'll need to go into mount selected partition, I think password, give it that, and yeah. The problem though is like this is mounted temporarily. So if I restart the computer, this is going to become unmounted, and I'll have to do this again. So to work around that, hit the settings icon here and then do edit mount options. I think by default, what's really interesting about Linux is that it will actually identify hardware devices as files. So if I kind of look through this listing here, what we can see is that the file that identifies this drive is in dev. It's in dev disk, and the UID, the unique identifier of the device itself, is sort of coded out here. That is different than where this it's different than where this device is actually mounted, right? Like it's different than where the data is accessible from, and data is set by default as accessible in the MNT directory or mount directory. So what you can do is you can kind of change this around a little bit. You want to unselect this user session defaults and then do mounted system startup. And if you want to give it something recognizable, like what I'll usually do is I'll give it the same. So I named it Linux Mass, right? When I provisioned, I'll just do something like Linux-mass, and I'll have it there. And generally I'll leave all this alone. It'll sort of automatically detect the file system type. Hit OK. Password. Okay. So I think if I go to places here, that is mounted, right? But if I unmount it, hopefully now if we restart the computer or restart this VM, it will automatically mount itself. Hopefully. Sometimes it's weird. Sometimes I've had to do this like twice in order for it to stick. But once it sticks, it generally sticks pretty good. Yep, so there it is. We got our mass storage device. I think you can even put like other locations and then drop. I think you can link that somewhere here if you want to. But this is a quick way to get at it too. If you're in your default Nautilus file explorer, just hit other locations, Linux mass. I think there is a way. It'll always show up because it's mounted here. But I think there actually is a way to have it list here as well. So that might be a little bit more convenient for you. So there you go. You have a bootable Linux operating system that's distinct and separate from your Windows 10 operating system. You got Steam installed. You got your Nvidia proprietary driver installed. We made some GUI tweaks here to make it a little bit more usable. Yeah, and you've even got a mounted mass storage device to dump your games onto. And from there, you can just point your Steam library at that storage device and you're off to the races. You set up a dual boot Windows 10 and Linux. So I hope I didn't meander too much in the video. It's kind of hard to do these things unscripted, but I think I held my own. Hopefully someone finds this helpful. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys soon. I'm going to be doing some more fun gameplay videos as well. So thank you so much for your time. You guys have a good night, and happy Linux. So, yeah, we learned how to do a dual boot, and so can you. Good night.